right. Well, hey, do you ever get to the end of your day or maybe the end of the week and you're like, what did I do today? Or what did I do this week? Did I accomplish anything? I mean, I know that I was busy, but what did I do? Maybe you're thinking, I feel like I'm always busy, but never productive. Or maybe you think like, I have to show somebody something to be like, hey, I was constructive today. I contributed to society. Anyone? My grandma Fran used to tell my mom that when my dad came home and asked what she did that day, because apparently keeping 2 little girls alive was not enough, just to tell my dad that she made Jell-O. She said my dad didn't actually care what my mom did all day. He just wanted to know that she did something. And so he would come home and he would say, what'd you do today? And she'd say, I make Jell-O. And he'd say, cool, cherry. Because he didn't really care. And that got me thinking, what do we do all day? What do I do all day? And then that led me down this rabbit hole of wondering, I wonder how many years we spend just doing things. And I learned that the average life expectancy is 79 years old. As a 45-year-old who is now among those who spends part of her vacations in the ER and uses readers on occasion, my upcoming mortality became very real. I mean, legit, something happens to your body when you turn 40. It doesn't care how young your mind is. It just keeps the score. It's like, nope, you've had 40 years. You are falling apart. And because I love to research, I went to the place where all knowledge is stored, of course, Google. And so humor me for just a minute as we go through a few of these, because there is one everyday activity that uses up 1/3 of our lives, and 8:30 guessed it. What is it? Sleep. I had no idea, okay? 26 of our 79 years are spent sleeping. As one who struggles to sleep, this is actually very discouraging to me. But we're talking about the average, and so 79-year-old average person spends 26 years sleeping. And the average person only spends 7 years trying to sleep. I think my numbers are mixed, but oh, whatever. Okay. So 1/3 of our lives we spend completely unaware of everything else that's going on. And then, if you thought it was going to be work, don't worry, because work comes in next. At 13 years, half of 26, only 20% of our total 79-year lifespan is spent at work. And this goes for all kinds of work, whether it's work in the office work at home work, stay-at-home parents, everything. And that doesn't even include the commute to said work, okay? That adds another 1.75 years of our lives that we can never get back. Side note, this does not include I-70 traffic. So you folks that do that thing, the skiing and the hiking and all of that, you spend way more time in the car than the average person. My dad, who actually worked a lot, he did admit that a lot of his really good ideas came to him on that commute. So not all was lost in his 1982 sky blue manual transmission Honda Accord hatchback with no air conditioning in the Houston heat. I think he lost years, actually. Then we get to screen time. Screens comes in at 12 years. This includes TV, computers, video games, phones, and all of our other devices. It does not, however, include all of the screen time that you spend doing screen things at work. So basically, we spend just about as much time on our recreational screens as we do at work. At this point, you're probably like, yay, glad I dragged myself to church this morning. Feeling good. You're welcome. And then, just for time's sake, we're gonna throw everything else up there. This includes eating, vacation, exercise, cleaning. People do that sometimes. Everything else, that's the rest of your life. And students, if you're wondering how many of your total years you are spending at school, because it must be somewhere around 100, I'm sorry to say that between kindergarten and 12th grade, you only spend 334 days at school. It does feel like 100 years, and your feelings matter, okay? But do you ever feel like you're just wasting your life on things that don't ultimately matter or don't make a difference? To be honest, I do, at least sometimes. There's a human desire to matter. We want to matter. But how? My husband Anthony and I watched a movie the other night, and every night while the main character was trying to fall asleep after a full day of striving, she would say 3 things to herself. I will not give up on myself. I will not give up on my dreams. I will make my life count. And so for the past 3 weeks, we have been in a series called the To Don't List, where we've been looking at 2 cycles, the cycle of grace and the cycle of works. And as we've seen the cycle of grace, it starts with acceptance, realizing that we are loved and accepted just as we are, which leads us to sustenance, where we understand that we are sustained not by our own efforts, but through the spiritual practices that help us reconnect to Jesus. And then last week, Tom talked about significance, that once we have received acceptance and sustenance, we are ready to find value not in what we have, but in who we are. And then simplicity helps us see this more clearly. And that leads us to today, achievement. Tom also said something that I think can help us better understand achievement in the cycle of grace. He said, we are image bearers with work to do, not work doers with an image to maintain. And this is where we're going today. See, we may spend 13 of those 79-ish years working, and while we were created to work, our understanding of work, success, and achievement has been tainted and misunderstood. And so let's stop right there and pause. And let's go all the way back to in the beginning, to Genesis, the first book in the Bible. And let's see if we can learn something about work from that creation account. Now, I know for some of you, you're not totally sold on the creation story, and I'm okay with that. Whether you think it's just an allegory or literal, there are still lessons that we can learn that, as we will see, have massive consequences. And it starts like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I love this because right away we learn a crucial thing about God and who he is. He is a creator. That's what he does. He creates. And what exactly does God create? Well, first, he creates space for life. Because the very first things that God created were light and plants and animals. And God's creation was good. But then we get to verse 26. I just don't want you to miss this because it says, then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. Did you catch it? At this point in the story, God had spent the last 5 days creating things. He had spoken things into existence. He had spoken the word, and light filled the darkness. He had separated water from the dry land. He had filled the earth with plants and animals and birds and fish and all of these things. And it was all good. But on the 6th day, he deviates from what he had done for the last 5 days when he made human beings in his image, to be like him. Now let's be clear, this does not say to be God. It doesn't even say to be gods. Human beings were made in God's image, to be like him, to be image bearers. But why? I mean, it feels to me like the world would be a much simpler and less complicated place for God without all of these human beings running around and ruining it, right? But see, from the very beginning, God made his image bearers with a purpose and a plan. So let's keep reading. Then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. Did you catch that? Did you even know? You and me, we were created originally to reign over God's creation. Other Bible translations say things like rule over, have dominion over, or even take charge of. But no matter how you read it, it is clear that God's plan was to put his image bearers over his creation, his kingdom. And the account continues. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Then God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground. God clearly states that the purpose behind creating humans differently than his previous creations His pinnacle creation will be made in his image to rule over the earth, tending to the plants and overseeing the animals that populate the land and the sky and the sea. Humans were created to work. And when God created humans, he set them aside to work with him. Work at its core is not a curse, it's actually a blessing. It's one of the things that we are uniquely created to do. We get to partner with the Creator because he created us to work in and among his creation. So just to be clear here, work equals blessing, not curse. But something happened. And because we all live in the real world, and there are times where it feels like we're not all living in this happy harmony, governing and reigning over the earth as one united human front. And so what happened? I'm glad you asked. Sin. Sin happened in the form of rebellion and pride and disobedience, to name a few. These things separated God's creation from him. Those humans that God created in his image, the male and the female, they had been given one boundary, one rule, one no by God. The beautiful garden that God had created just for them had lots of trees, but there was one tree that he said was not for them. They could eat from any other tree, but not that one. And how many of you know that as soon as there's a limit or a boundary, you can't stop thinking about it, obsessing over it, wondering what would it be like to have the one thing you can't have? My mom is a sewer, not of seeds, of fabric. And as any sewer knows, scissors are a big deal. See, once scissors cut paper, it dulls the scissors. And so sewers are obsessed with their scissors. They're super sharp, only for fabric scissors. And so there was a rule at our house. We could use any scissors in the house, but we were not allowed to use mom's sewing scissors. They even said sewing only on the handle, just in case we got too close and forgot. And so what did I obsess over? What did I dream about? And so I would casually walk past with a handful of construction paper and would eye the sewing scissors. And I would get this excited tummy, imagining how much better my project would be if I could only use the sewing scissors. And honestly, how would my mom even know? And so one day in the sewing room, I reached out my hand and I gently touched the sewing scissors. And much to my surprise, they felt just like every other scissors in the house. And I waited, and my mom didn't yell. And so I put those scissors to paper like it was my job. And it was glorious. Those scissors, they glided right through the paper. I didn't even have to do the snipping. They just slid right through. So sharp, so wonderful. And immediately, I knew that my mom was just being selfish. She was keeping these wonderful scissors all to herself. And I totally got away with it. Or so I thought. Because when my mom used her angry mom tone and held out the sewing scissors later that day, I knew that she knew. How did she know? I'm still perplexed. And I know it's easy to laugh because we've all been tempted in these simple and silly ways. But when the first humans, Adam and Eve, when they were tempted by the one thing that God had said they can't have, when they finally gave in to their temptation, they didn't get an "I'm very disappointed in you" and a swift grounding. At this moment, God's perfect and very good creation broke, and the consequences were bigger and impacted not just Adam and Eve in that moment, but all of humanity from that moment on. Genesis 3 says this, "And to the man he said, 'Since you listened to your wife and ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you, and your life, all your life, you will struggle to scratch a living from it.' So what was a blessing is now a curse. It will grow thorns and thistles for you, though you will eat of its grains. By the sweat of your brow," sweat is even a consequence here, will you have food to eat until you return to the ground from which you were made, for which you were made from the dust, and to dust you will return. That seems pretty harsh, right? But listen, this was the moment that humans said, you know what, God? I actually think I know better than you. You withheld something good from me, and I deserve what I want. And God was like, you have no idea. And to be honest, I think, as I think about it, I might have actually rather had God's punishment for the fruit than what I got from my mom for the scissors, but I'm in therapy, so it's fine. So what do we do with all of that? Well, I have a few thoughts. See, work was what was meant to be a blessing and is now a curse. And in that framework, the cycle of grace gets flipped. And that's how we get stuck going around the cycle the wrong way. We get stuck then in the cycle of works. A few years ago, I was introduced to a book that completely transformed how I understand my relationship with God. In fact, I've probably recommended this book to you if you've ever asked what you should read, and to some of you who never asked, because this book was so good. See, Skye Jethani, who is a former pastor and now a speaker and podcaster and writer, wrote a book simply called With. And in it, Skye walks the reader through these 4 different postures that most Christians in today's world attempt to relate to God. And here they are. The first one is that we try to work under God. This means that we are trying to manipulate or control God through our religious behavior. It's this mindset that if we follow all the rules and we live the right way, that we're going to get blessings from God. However, this approach lacks the true dependence on God's grace and love. We're always waiting for God to just punish us for not living right. And it misses that grace and that love that only Jesus can offer. And then next, we try to work over God. This is the belief that achieving the right outcomes, such as success or healing or answered prayers, that's what matters most. It overlooks that God primarily just desires this loving relationship with us rather than our pursuit of correct results. The third one is to work from God. This is that mindset that treats God as a means to an end, seeking his blessings or his gifts or his miracles rather than valuing who he is. It prioritizes what we can get from God instead of cherishing that relationship with him above everything, treating him more like a vending machine of blessing. And then for some of us, we strive to work for God. This idea that we must earn God's love through our obedience, our service, and our good works. It places the burden on our own efforts rather than on trusting in God's unconditional love and grace. But where Skye lands is that we are not actually meant to work, or that we are actually meant to work with God. Instead of striving to gain his favor, we are invited to rest in the love that he has already given us. And I gotta stop here for a second because, at Eastern Hills, we are actually for Aurora. And you're like, wait, you just said not for. And I wanna say, we're going to continue to be for Aurora because when we are for Aurora, we are not working for God. We are working with God, coming alongside what God is for. God is for Aurora, and so we are with God when we are for Aurora. And while each of these perspectives, working under, over, from, and for God, they all miss that heart of true grace-filled relationship with God when we try to do life for God. This is where so many of us, especially if we've been following Jesus for a long time, this is where we might get stuck. Just going around and around, trying to work for God, trying to earn something. Usually it's acceptance from God. Trying and trying and trying, and finally burning out. And for some, that looks like completely walking away, feeling like, why try when I know I'm never gonna measure up? I'm never gonna be enough. I'm never, ever gonna earn or prove or achieve whatever it is that I've been striving for. And there it is, the cycle of works. And so this chapter on working for God in Sky's book, it begins with him telling this story about some Christian college students who felt like they were never going to measure up to God's standards because they had doubts or questions or they were being tempted by something. And they felt like that was unacceptable on their campus. And so he asks them how they felt that God thought of them in the midst of their sin. And he heard them say things like, God is disappointed in me. He expects more from me. He can't use me until I clean up my act. And then Sky surprised them, and he said that they were all wrong. He said, not one of you said that in the midst of your sin, God still loves you. Now let's just stop here for a minute. Do you believe that? Do you believe that no matter who you are, where you come from, what you've done, or what you're doing right now, that God loves you? Sky goes on and he writes this. He says, I did not blame the students for this failure. See, somewhere in their spiritual formation, they were taught either explicitly or implicitly that what mattered was not God's love for them, but how much they could accomplish for him. For him. And this happens all the time. It's happened to me. Maybe it's happened to you, where you try to find value in the work that you're doing, the mission of God. But in that, we forget to include God. And we try to find worth in what we can achieve. We can become so consumed by our mission, our significance, that we forget that before anything else, we must remember that we are accepted just as we are. We can become so compelled, even here at E-Hills, with our mission to invite everyone to experience that following Jesus makes life better. But first, before we can even get to the invite, you and me, we have to experience that following Jesus makes life better. And to experience that, we have to know Jesus. And I don't mean to know a million things about him. I don't mean to know the Bible by memory. I mean to know, to have a relationship with him, to know who he is, to know his character, to know how he loves us, forgives, and understands who we are. Jesus calls this abiding. And a couple weeks ago, Tom talked about this. Jesus says in John chapter 15, abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. It is only when we abide with, when we remain connected to, when we dwell close to God, only when we abide can we bear much fruit. Only then can the work that we are doing, that we have uniquely been created to do. Jesus says later in that text that when we strive to do work for God without abiding with God and in God, then what we're doing there is like garbage. He says it's like waste that gets thrown into the fire and burned. God does not desire our works. He wants our hearts. He wants us to come close to him, to abide in him. Okay, so when we think about that word achievement, there are probably a lot of feelings and maybe even some assumptions that come with that. What are you thinking right now when I say achievement? What word? The Oxford Dictionary actually defines it as a thing done successfully, typically by effort, courage, or skill. And then the Merriam-Webster says a result gained by effort. Dictionary.com goes on and says something accomplished by superior ability, special effort, great courage, etc. You see the word that is found in all three of those definitions? Effort. And effort may have been one of those words that you thought of when I said achievement, along with things like accomplishment or attainment, performance, success, victory. No matter what word that makes you think of, achievement makes you think of something that you have to do. And in a society that places great value on what we do, this makes sense. I mean, when you meet someone, you probably introduce yourself, ask them their name, and then you ask, what do you do? And that's it, right there. That's how the cycle of works thinking gets going. This is how we so easily slip from the cycle of grace into the cycle of works, because we can wrap our brains around this. What I do gives me purpose. My purpose gives me identity, and my identity allows for acceptance. But as we've been seeing over the last 3 weeks, this is not how we are designed to relate to ourselves, to the world, or to God. And here's the thing, when we look at the cycle of grace, achievement is the goal. It's what we're working toward as we find acceptance, sustenance, and significance. But here's what we need to remember. We achieve because we are invited to work with God. The work that we have been invited to be a part of is not a burden, it's a blessing. At least it's meant to be. And when we work with God, we get to experience a different way of working, of achieving, where it's no longer bound to this checklist of things that I have to get done, but instead we start to reframe how we think of work. And to be honest, as I was preparing for this message on achievement, I panicked. Because the last thing that I wanted to do was to get all the way through this series called the to-don't list, and then give you a list of things to do, or to add to your forever long list of those things that you're already doing, need to do, want to do, but never have enough time to get done. And I do want to give you a takeaway, something that you can walk out of here with today and continue thinking about. Because like I said, achievement is the goal in the cycle of grace. And so there is work to do with God. And so to help us with this, I'm going to ask you 3 questions. First one, what makes you come alive? That thing that just naturally fills you up and brings you joy. It leaves you feeling energized and excited. This could be any number of things. And don't look at that person next to you because their answer is different than yours. Maybe what came to your mind is hosting people in your house, because believe it or not, there are people who love cooking and cleaning and connecting with people. I got 1 out of the 3. Or maybe you immediately thought about how much fun you have when you get to hang out with kids, playing games and just chatting and learning about what's going on in their lives. Perhaps you couldn't stop thinking about how excited you are that the weather is warming up because you can't wait to start riding your bike. Whatever you thought of, that's your passion. And thankfully, we all have different passions. Like I said, I am perplexed by someone who chooses to ride their bike for fun. To me and my body, that feels like punishment. So what are you passionate about? Next, what are you good at? Not just what do you love, but what are you uniquely wired to do? It seems so brainless and so easy to you, but when you stop and think about it, not everyone feels that way. I have a friend who makes people feel so comfortable, so at ease, and she creates this warm and inviting space wherever she goes because she is naturally a warm and inviting person. And I tell her all the time, this is not normal. Not everyone can do that. But she does it without even thinking about it. It's just like an extension of who she is. What are you good at? This could be anything, and I mean anything. We all have a talent that is unique to us, and that's the way that it's supposed to be. And then my last question, what is the need? There are big needs all over the world. I won't argue with that. What are the needs in our community, on your street, in your family? Look around, because here's the best part. Where passion, talent, and need intersect, that's what God wants you to do. And this is not just work, but where the blessing of work happens. The blessing of working with God. That's where achievement in the cycle of grace comes into play. And because it is something that you are passionate about, like connecting with others, and something that you are good at, by creating warm and inviting spaces, then the need doesn't feel like a barrier or a burden. It feels like an invitation to partner with what God is already doing. And suddenly hosting a group in your home doesn't feel like one more thing that you have to do. It feels like something that you get to do because it brings you joy. This may or may not be your job, your 9 to 5. but it might align with it. It might complement that. It might be volunteering in our kids programming here on a Sunday morning, or maybe it's just inviting your coworkers to start riding bikes on the weekend. The possibilities are endless and they're exciting and they can change over time, and that's okay. Just keep asking those same questions. What makes me come alive? What am I good at? And what is the need? Because I heard it said once, when purpose and passion meet, you are unstoppable. The cycle of works is a never-ending, exhausting, and unfulfilling cycle. Because the truth is, for us in this world, by these standards, we might never feel like we're enough. And we'll spin out trying to prove that we are. But the truth is that we don't have to prove anything. Instead, we are invited to come alongside God, the one who created us in his image, to be like him, not him, and to work with him, not for him. And this work, the work at that intersection of passion, talent, and need, this is not exhausting work, but it is life-giving achievement that matters because it is the work that we are created to do. So as we close, I'm gonna read these words that were written in Psalm 46. And I'm gonna ask you to stand right now. And if you're comfortable, hold your hands like this in a posture of surrender. And close your eyes and receive these words of truth from God to you. God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. Be still and know that I am God. I will be honored by every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. God, we know that you will not give up on us. God, we know that you will not give up on our dreams. God, we know that you will make our lives count. God, you can do so much more than anything that we could ever ask or dream or imagine. Now, go and do the thing that God created only you to do. You are unstoppable because God made you unstoppable. Let's sing.